So all weekend long, I was thinking about coming in here to have this session with all of you, and it's no question this is going to be the most exciting part of my week. So I get to do it right here, first thing during the week, which is great. I want to share with you some thoughts before we get into the dialogue and the discussion about this. And the reason I'm excited about having this conversation, we're going to talk about one of my favorite things, which is fiber. And there's a lot of reasons why I think this is important. And hopefully as I get through the material today and as we have this dialogue, you'll be as excited and understand how important and relevant this is to our business as I carry around with me each and every day. So if I were to first start out and say, I'd like to fast forward 3 years from now, and if I could wave my hand and put us out 3 years, there'd probably be two things I'd observe that I hope is happening at this company 3 years from now. One is that nobody would be using the terminology in region or out of region to describe our company. And that would kind of just have moved away from everybody's vocabulary. The second is we wouldn't be distinguishing networks with terminology like the wireless network or the fixed network. We would simply be talking about the fact that at AT&T, we build great broadband networks. That's our job. If we were thinking about this march that we've been on as a company, I would say there has never been a definition of a fixed or wireless network. In fact, people who have been around me for a long period of time could probably go all the way back to 2010 when I would frequently say, there are no fixed networks, there are no wireless networks, there are only fiber networks. And they all have different access technologies hanging off of them. And at that time, that sometimes was viewed as a stretch by people. But if you think about the progression that's occurred, and sadly I can say that I've watched this progression all the way back to 1984. When we were building cell sites in 1984, the typical average radius of a cell tower was about 8 miles. If you fast forward into the 2010, 2012 timeframe, that cell tower radius was about 2.5 miles. If you think about where we are today, we're now building cell sites that have 800-foot radius on them. If you go back to 1984, typically that cell tower had a copper-based T1 sitting on the other side of it to aggregate and collect the phone calls that were coming in over the network. By the time we hit that 2.5-mile radius level that I was talking about in 2010 and 12, we were pushing headlong into getting fiber to every single one of our cell sites because so much traffic was starting to occur you couldn't possibly keep up with it by serving it with just TDM-based DS1s. And of course, today we sit here and we're distributing fiber out everywhere so that we can have distributed fiber to pick up those 800-foot radius cell sites, and we're up speeding the capacity behind every single macro tower and cell site we have. So if ever there was an example that we really have fiber networks, I would tell you we're living in that moment today, and we're just hanging different kind of access technologies on the other side of it. And you think about those access technologies, and they come a variety of different flavors. There's certainly our licensed spectrum that sits on the side of a cell tower. In your home, you might be using Wi-Fi as one of your primary forms of access into a fiber that's physically terminated at the side of your home. And that termination in today's vernacular could be a gig, now moving to 5 gig and 10 gig in your home, literally terminated on the side of the house. You may even have a physical connection in some cases into that physical termination. We have unlicensed spectrum that people are using beyond Wi-Fi that there are now starting to show up in businesses, in private networks. So the point of my commentary that we put fiber out and we use a variety of different access technologies is really coming to bear every day as we're out there in our environments now. Now let me step back for just a second and ask you a real simple question. How does our company make money?
Connections and customers.
connections to customers. When do we make even better or the most money typically? What's the characteristics of our network when we tend to do really, really well in terms of our profitability?
Multiple connections.
Multiple connections or density, right? Obviously, when we build networks in really dense areas, they tend to have better economics than we build networks in more sparse areas. And the reason behind that is because we're able to put something in the ground, invest in something, and get more traffic on it. And so what I would tell you is if you think about the foundation of our company, we've generally made money by taking scarce right-of-way and figuring out how to aggregate and put traffic on it. What do I mean by right-of-way? Well, there's the traditional mindset of right-of-way, which is we would go string fiber down literally a right-of-way that we had permission to do that on. And if we could put more traffic on that fiber, it would become more profitable, more scaled, and better for us. Spectrum is really a form of right-of-way, right? You go out and you get a license or permission from the government to have exclusive access to some radio waves, and you build infrastructure to be able to put traffic on it. It's just another form of right-of-way. And because you have to go get the spectrum licensed, you have to invest substantial amounts of money to light it or make it work, that's really kind of the scarcity of the product or the service that we bring in. No different than when we put a fiber down a back alley and ultimately attach individuals' homes to it, or the same thing we do in a business complex or a business park. So our business is really rooted on this notion of we get scarce right-of-way, we invest in that right-of-way to build connectivity-based services that are on there, and the denser that right-of-way is, the more traffic we can get on it, typically, the more profitable it is or the better return to our business. So if at the most atomic level you think about what the mission of our company is, if we all came into work and we thought about the fact that for every foot of fiber we put in the ground, we want to get as much traffic on that fiber as we possibly can, that would drive the economic performance of our business. And in the network business, any of you who have been around it for a long time know that the more scaled a network gets, the more traffic that you get, you ultimately have an advantage over somebody else who doesn't have as much traffic, because the marginal cost structure, the cost to carry the next unit of traffic, is lower as you scale, if you build your network correctly. And if your marginal cost structure is lower than anybody else, that means that your profitability could be superior, or your ability to keep that flywheel going to attract even more traffic is going to be improved. And so as we think about what we're attempting to do in this business, as we think about the notion that there are no wireless and wireline networks, there are only broadband networks, our goal ought to be to invest our money, to invest in infrastructure in that scarce right-of-way to attract as much traffic as we possibly can for every dollar or every foot of fiber that we put in the ground, irrespective of the access technology that we use to get the traffic onto the network. That's all we have to do around here. That's it. It's that simple. Right?
Easy.
Easy. No problem. So let me go into kind of the last things I want to share about this, because it's really easy to think about just the network. But at the end of the day, we build networks because customers need to use them. And I would tell you that I think we're moving into an era where we have no choice but to start the journey to be the best. And in some regards, when I talk about scaling and having the lowest marginal cost, inherent in that is if you can get more traffic than anybody else, well then customers must be making a choice to use your service because you're the best, or you're better than somebody else, or you're in more places than anybody else. And what I would say is we really have no choice moving forward but to start to run the company and start this journey of being loved, being cherished, being indispensable. I don't care what terminology you want to use, but you have to distinguish yourself in the customer's mind of being special. And if you don't believe that, I would just ask you to examine your own personal behaviors right now and how you're making choices of who you're doing business with and what you're doing in your personal life. You're sitting there on your phone and you're making a decision on any given day, do I want to use this app or that app? And your decision to switch is as simple as loading, a piece of software that takes about 15 seconds to show up and starting a new relationship with somebody if your previous company that you had the relationship with ticked you off or upset you or didn't do something right. And we are truly moving into a world where people have that kind of flexibility and choice. And I would go a step further and tell you that if you're in the kind of world we're in, and I probably don't even need to give you examples, if I talked about what's happening in the public domain on the AT&T brand any given day or any given week right now, it's incredibly choppy. It's amazing. On a given day, we can walk out and somebody's alleging that we're a far-right, neoconservative, ultra-right-wing company, and 15 minutes later, somebody else might be out there alleging that we are a left-wing, socialist, populist business that's trying to undermine capitalism. So I ask, how can a company within a 15-minute period of time swing from one end of the spectrum to the other? And the reality is none of it's true. We obviously are a business that is principled and move forward in a variety of different ways. But one way you insulate yourself from this dynamic of what's going on in society is you become beloved. If people trust you and feel that you're doing the right thing, then these extremes that sometimes tend to pop up mean less. They tend to drop away. Your colors are known to be true. And so when I indicate that we need to start moving down the path, one of the reasons is we're in a far more fragmented society than we've ever been. There's far more noise out there, and it's truly going to take great brands and beloved service to a customer to kind of elevate yourself above that noise level and sustain the business. And this is a really important part of what we have to do and how we have to think about things. Last point I'll make. One aspect of our brand, and when I think about being great at broadband, that I think is going to be very important to us is that authentically, we are a company that wants to solve the digital divide. That is part of who we are. And when I say authentically, I mean authentically. And when I sit back and think about the position of our company and our business, I can think of a company that's no better positioned than to make this happen. One is we have tremendous resources and capability. But if you go back in our history and think about who was the company that established universal voice service in the United States and who was most responsible for making that happen, it was, in fact, our business, AT&T. And as we all step back right now, we think about the reality of the internet and what it means to an individual who has access to it for purposes of communicating with loved ones, having economic opportunity to work or be employed, having access to reasonable health care, being able to educate oneself of what's occurring in any given day or week as knowledge continues to improve. It's time that we accept that everybody who lives in this country should be able to gain access to the scaled aspects of the internet if they need to have access. And I think this is what our company needs to be about. It needs to be one of the true authentic pillars of what we do in society. And so as you look at things that we have taken on over the last several months, and what we're about right now is to ensure that we can do our part in moving the United States forward on, once and for all, dealing with the digital divide relative to the internet, and ensure that everybody has access to the internet, and it's done in an equitable fashion. And I do believe we're at a rare moment right now, partly driven by the pandemic, where the fact that individuals did not have that opportunity clearly laid bare the fact that they are not in the same position of individuals that do. And so we're reorienting our company and everything we do around our charitable giving, how the foundation is set up, and in fact, how we organize our company and the policies that we bring forth to try to move the ball forward on this issue. And I believe we can be a leader in our industry and in the country and a sound voice in making that happen. And as we set up groups of people that are going to be advocating for us to gain access to government dollars to build networks for the underserved, as we think about what we've agreed to in policy changes around products that we'll be offering at reduced prices to those who can't afford it, and how we'll participate in these programs, what we'll do to advocate on behalf of those individuals to gain access to our networks, working with other organizations to ensure they have access to the terminal equipment and the knowledge that they need to be able to use the internet effectively and safely. These are all things that will be part and parcel to our business. So I think it's not only important that we be really good at building networks and have the best broadband networks out there and have the most pervasive fiber networks with different access technologies on it to aggregate traffic so that we can get the right kind of returns for our shareholders. But we also want our brand to be something that people recognize as being inherently great and indispensable and responsible in terms of how we bring everybody in the United States forward to the digital revolution. So with that, let me stop. Hopefully you get a sense of why I'm so doggone excited about fiber, and I'm so doggone excited about taking this company on the journey to be the best broadband company in America. And I gotta tell you, when I think about what that means in terms of the challenges for the work that needs to be done, the policy shifts that have to occur, the money that needs to be invested, and how we need to run this company moving forward, I get incredibly energized about it. I think these are meaningful problems for society. I think these are meaningful opportunities for how people need to live and work and run their businesses in every given day. I think the problems are intellectually challenging. I think there's going to be an incredible amount of innovation that comes off the backbone of our infrastructure and networks that build. So what's on your mind and what do you want to talk about?
So as I think about the topics that you just described, there's a real interplay between them. You know, how do we show profitability for the shareholders? How do we become more beloved? And how do we solve the digital divide? But there's also a conflict, especially between sort of solving the digital divide and showing profitability for our shareholders. But I'm really excited about all of the federal funding that's actually out there that we're in a great place to take advantage of, both the stimulus funding as well as the infrastructure funding that's pending on the Hill. And this funding could really help us offset costs and help us connect people that it would otherwise not be economical for us to connect. And so I'm just really excited that we really could connect the unconnected.
Yeah, as am I. We're at a once in a lifetime moment. You know, there is an unprecedented amount of investment going on in telecommunications that we've never seen. And I think as a posture, oftentimes as a company, sometimes we've shied away from being aggressive to leaning in on those things. And in order for us to avail ourselves of some of that funding, I mentioned we're going to have to make some concessions around how we might want to price products and services. And I think a lot of times we might recoil at that and say, well, gosh, you know, if we put a $30 product out there, how many of our customers who can afford to pay it might buy down? You know, they might choose to take the cheaper product. Well, there's certainly a risk of that, but I also like to think that if we make the better products, the more expensive products, really good for the customer, then by choice, they're going to want to get those better products. And they're going to want to buy into something that's more capable. And the fact that we're putting a more affordable product out there, I believe will expand the market in the end. We still have a lot of homes that don't have a more scaled broadband product or service. Notice I didn't say fixed. Going into their home. And as a result of that, we can expand the size of the market. And if we can run that scale game I talked about to actually operate at the lowest marginal cost, if we have the best network out there that has lower churn, which means we have fewer truck rolls and we have lower costs as a result of acquiring our customers, there's no reason we shouldn't be in a position to give a responsible return to our shareholders for participating in that and still move society further ahead. So I get excited about it as well. It's a great opportunity right now that we have more technology tools available to us to do this than we ever have. And one of the things when I talk earlier about, I don't want to talk about in region and out of region, we want to talk about where we can accumulate customers. You may use your great position in wireless to go in and find customers in a particular geography and choose to do something initially to get some customer scale. And then once you start to aggregate traffic and you have enough of it concentrated, then what do? You take it off the wireless network and you drop in fiber directly, or you drop in a more dense cell infrastructure in those cases. But boy, for the first time, going after acquiring that traffic, aggregating it in a particular area, and then building the network to match. And what a preferred position to be in than, say, a cable company who doesn't have wireless spectrum and the dense wireless infrastructure to go and hunt to aggregate traffic outside of their region and then build infrastructure in behind it that's more scaled. That's the game of aggregation and getting the marginal cost structure that's superior in the industry than anybody else that I'm talking about.
Do we need to innovate on top of that up stack, if you want to call it that way? But so you go into the digital divide, they may not be used, well, just take advantage of that broadband. I think education, I mean, to me, some of this new broadband and some of the higher speeds with education should start really bringing some innovative experiences. Do you let that ecosystem work its own out because they see the bandwidth coming, or do we need to invest and inject into that?
It's a good question, Glenn, and I think the answer is a little bit of both. In some instances, I don't think that it's going to be AT&T, for example, that builds the software that becomes the premier distance learning, at-home learning tool for school districts and educational systems around the U.S. But are there things that we can do, one, from a policy perspective, to ensure that a school district who decides that they want to aggressively begin doing more distance learning and integrate the classroom with the home, to make sure that we have policies in place that everybody can be connected? Sure. Are there things that we can do within our network that allows for us to have better capabilities that make sure that people can have a great experience doing that? And even when we're in situations where we know, well, it'd be great if everybody had plenty of bandwidth, we know that sometimes that they don't always have plenty of bandwidth. And especially as infrastructure is being built out over the next few years, can we do things like help school districts tag packets to ensure that in a situation where somebody maybe doesn't have plentiful bandwidth, that the distance learning experience is in fact getting priority in their home? And it's getting a little bit more priority than the 20-something-year-old brother or sister down the hall that maybe is gaming at the time that junior is trying to learn in school. There are many of things that we can do as we start to abstract out capabilities in the network to work with software providers to give them natural hooks into the network to be able to do different things. And I believe that's absolutely where we need to be adding value. And that's really when you look at what Jeremy and I were talking about in the session we did. Those are the kind of capabilities that we want to bring forward and make our network the preferred network as a result of that innovation.
So I come into this from the spectrum perspective. To your point, everything hangs off of fiber, certainly the wireless network does. And spectrum is nothing if you don't have that backhaul. As we are thinking about our fiber build out, are we integrating the needs of the wireless, the expansion and the densification of the wireless network to reach those customers with the business consumer side, what we used to call the fixed or wireline? Do we have the right mix today to make sure that as we put a fiber investment out there, we are leveraging that end mile both from the wireless side and the wireline? And keeping in mind that wireless, I mean, not every bid is equally valuable to the customer, and they're willing to pay more for the bid that runs through their mobile phone. So are we making sure that our major asset, wireless network, is in the mix here?
So building an access network is kind of our bread and butter, right? It's what we do for a living, as my friends say. The mission is this. Once we identify an area that we're going to invest in fiber in, based on sound economics. We do all our checks and balances to ensure a return on that investment. But once we decide that, the mission is that we have to make sure that whatever we do, be in interfacing that entire area with fiber, making sure that we are serving consumer, business, and enabling our mobility specifically for 5G on our future networks. That's going to be the key to our success, is we have to ensure that every fiber that we place in an area is accessible by anybody in that area.
Let me jump in. I build the network, so fiber is very important to me. Mo hit it on the head. I would say in the past we were very consumer driven. There's no doubt about that. We were gunning, but we're getting very smart. We're doing now the consumer, the business, the mobility moving forward. I think one thing I'm seeing is silos are dropping all around us, and it's become more of a team sport than it ever has, and more of the empowerment is coming to the local teams and the local networks.
And let's be candid, there are a lot of things that we have done as a business that, for whatever reason, they were probably the right practice at one point in time, that maybe have seen their better day. An example I would give is how we funded projects. And to get scale, we might go down and say, you can go build this many houses with this much money, and make sure you build this many houses with this much money. And you kind of get what you measure. And while somebody was on the path to get that many houses with that much money, they'd roll fiber right down by a business park or a strip mall or a school, but that didn't count to the number of houses they got, so we didn't bother to terminate it into the business park or the school or the strip mall. And there was some pretty good business to pick up there. And now we have to think differently about that. And there are places where we've put fiber in the distribution that could become great wholesale opportunities for us to provide backhaul to other providers that need density. And our company has always had a really robust wholesale business. And there's nothing wrong with us putting fiber in and using that to have other people's networks right on our network. That's how you get to scale. That's how you get money to put more fiber in and keep that flywheel going. I would say we're in the early innings of getting really competent and kind of building that muscle back into our company and doing it in a differential way. And if there's anything I can implore people to figure out how to break down those silos and how to build that new intellectual property and how to think differently about it, this is one of the great levers of our business getting better and driving better returns and ultimately being the most scaled broadband provider in the United States, is to make this pivot and this shift that we're all talking about here.
John, what you're talking about is a lot of the stuff we've been, practicing and getting better at over the last several months. So these guys right here, we've been in probably daily calls, sometimes multiple daily calls since August, towards that effort of how do we make sure we are maximizing. We're going to hit the consumers, we're going to hit the businesses, we're going to make sure that we're sized for anything and everything that may come with regard to wireless or whatever else down the line. As we're going into neighborhoods that maybe were previously focused on an industrial neighborhood where it may not have been a high priority for us before, we're going to now ensure that they've got fiber access. We're going to make sure they've got wireless access. And so what that's going to do is bring up those opportunities that we can sell into, we can monetize, and we can gain the density that we're talking about. And I think that that's all through this area of how do we fill in those holes, gain the density, and maximize the cash flow.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's really, the excitement around the America Rescue Plan, the subsidies, right? If you think about what we've done so far, we've kind of started out in our metro core, in our major markets. This year, we're kind of moving into the suburbs, right? So from a subsidy and economic standpoint, you talk about balancing the return. On the, the more urban side, you usually are dealing with adoption. We talked about a little bit about that. That's going to help with that, getting us the right economics to shore up that footprint. And then the more rural side, where the cost really prohibits us from going in, it's a real opportunity to serve both of those spectrums.
As we look at this opportunity to be part of the solution with ARP dollars, which is great. Also looking at the need to decommission in some areas and how we have the overlap of those financials where we are getting revenue right now, and we need to kind of move forward with this fiber opportunity. So I'd love to have some discussion about that.
It's a good question, Renee. It's so important to the future of this company, and I think about this. I don't know that everybody fully appreciates the intertwined nature of this. And here's how I think about this. We're building incredibly capable and scaled wireless networks, probably well beyond the belief that any of us thought 20 years ago, could ultimately be constructed and engineered. And I think it's fair to say when they're done right, they actually provide a superior experience for somebody who wants to make a telephone call or wants to do maybe what I'll call impromptu browsing or impromptu data sessions. And in fact, in some cases, they're so good, our wireless infrastructure is far exceeding some of the past investment we had made in what we would call our fixed copper infrastructure for data services. And you step back and ask ourselves, if we have an obligation to make sure that we continue to give people an opportunity to have voice services everywhere, what better way to do it than to have a great scaled wireless network that can get inside everybody's house? That's good for our wireless business, right? If we have that kind of coverage and that kind of depth, that's a good place for us to be. And so when I think about allocating capital in our company and what I want to do to lean into the future, I think about leaning into the future to make the wireless business great, to make the wireless network great, to be able to be the voice network no matter where you go. And FirstNet, and doing that for first responders and having access everywhere is also consistent with that approach. So as we build out coverage to meet our FirstNet obligations, we not only get the benefit of dealing with first responders, but we can offer a household that needs access to the voice network a great wireless service. And we should be able to be in a position to do that and ultimately start to decommission, as you called it, infrastructure around it that's more expensive and frankly not as capable as we do that. And as we decommission, cost structure goes down, our wireless infrastructure gets stronger. Now, where the wireless traffic becomes concentrated enough, you want fiber behind it, right? You want more fiber. You want to get that right density in place. And so as we get that magic going across the board, you then start to pull out some of the more mature technologies that we have in the business and wind up with capillaries of fiber wherever the traffic warrants it, and leaning on the wireless network, a really capable wireless network wherever the fiber isn't warranted yet. And I think that dynamic is part and parcel to what we're talking about. When we get the engineering right, when we get the product right, when we use subsidy dollars in the right way, boy, that can be a really powerful combination of a company that just looks like a great wireless network with a lot of fiber behind it and very simple product sets on top of it. And that's how you move to be best. And that's the direction we're heading. And that's what everybody in this business needs to be mobilized behind.
I think the key is that our customers aren't looking for a specific product or service. What they want is to be connected, something that meets their needs.
No matter where they are.
So the key now that we're spending all this, we're going to be the best network and the best company. What opportunities do we have of convergence of those networks? What use cases in the Connectivity Plus, as an example, would you look for us to align as a company behind once we have the network?
I think you described it perfectly. Nobody gets up in the morning and thinks about, as a normal customer, gosh, I really want to go engage with this company to solve this particular connectivity problem and this company to solve that one. I'm on an airplane, maybe I need a different relationship on an airplane. I'm in a hotel, maybe I need a different relationship in a hotel. I'm at my home, maybe I need to tailor a plan for what I need on my... most customers want to get up in the morning and say, I'd like a relationship with somebody who makes sure I'm connected no matter where I am. Why shouldn't we be the company that solves that problem? And it doesn't mean that we'll necessarily have network everywhere, but why shouldn't we be the integrator of networks and have that relationship where we control on behalf of the customer their connectivity no matter where they are or where they travel, and we ensure that it meets their expectations. And I suspect If you could simplify that kind of a relationship and do it in an effective way, that in and of itself has value to the customer. Then we talk about some of those things we were discussing earlier about how you could refine that further. Many of us are moving into the dynamic of hybrid work right now. You may not be in your office every day. You may be somebody who spends a couple days a week at home working and a couple days in the office. Well, why should there be difference in the security and the performance of your network in the office than your network at home? And as the CIO of a company, if I'm Bank of America, I might want my employee that's working from home today to have every bit the security and every bit the performance as if they were sitting in one of our buildings in Charlotte. Now, can we build our network to help them do that? Can our gateways at home, when somebody's using our fiber, actually give them the quality of service that they experience at home? Can we give them the encapsulation of that traffic inside a secure wrapper that ensures that it's not mixing with the other foul traffic somewhere inside the home, right? So that the CIO of the company has confidence that in fact that's as secure a session in your home residence as it is in Charlotte in the office building. And so I think these are the things that where we come in and we say our job is to give very simple and straightforward approaches to connectivity and then begin to differentiate in a way that bridges the use cases in a customer's life is what should be our bread and butter.
I would just submit another use case which you talked about before, which is education in schools, right? Because with remote learning, there are certain protections that kids need to have on the data and the types of programs that they can use, but you don't know where the kids are going to be learning. This week they might be in school. Next week they might be quarantined. The week after, the teacher's in the school, but the kids are at home, that kind of thing. And so if we can make this seamless education and learning connectivity happen, I think that would be such an amazing possibility. And you even talked about sort of monitoring within the house. If kids are learning and the school is providing the connectivity service, we want to make sure that learning gets prioritized, right?
And Meredith, I think some of the things you're alluding to as well, in some cases, our relationship may not be with the actual customer using the service. We may have to have the relationship with the school district to facilitate these things. And so as we think about our business model evolution, we need to be sensitive to those types of things. And there opens up opportunity to the extent that we can be flexible and do that. And I think, frankly, there's probably no company better positioned to have credibility working across those market segments than AT&T.
John, you talked about in the beginning, I'm taking a slight mental shift here, being beloved, right? And so when you talk about things like bridging the digital divide and FirstNet and just this massive investment in our customers, do we think, and I think it's probably be a combo of both, do we think it will be an organic thing that our customers feel? Or do we go out and really get aggressive? I don't think we've done our best work around getting aggressive on this talk track of we do so much for our customers, right? And we're there for you at all times. I mean, no company does it better in times of disaster than we do. I don't know that we've been super loud in that space. So what are your thoughts around truly tackling this becoming beloved?
And Nina, it's a fair question. And if we're just talking about, candidly what has to happen, one is we need to finish this transition that we've set up, right? We need to get the company structured the right way. We're going through the painful steps to make sure that that happens. I think in one of the sessions I talked a little bit about one of the drivers behind that is to maybe simplify the value proposition so that each company can in fact talk about what they do best and, not insignificant, free up the capital structure in a way that we can invest to actually make the products the best so that we can step up to the kind of infrastructure that we're talking about here to actually deliver the best product possible. And then paired with that is, if that's where you're going to go, and we're moving through that process, and second quarter next year, hopefully we have all that stuff behind us, God willing, then you get into the next step, which is how do you want to advocate, as you described it, out to the customer, what the communications company, what the AT&T brand stands for. And there's been a pretty sizable group of leaders working with Kellen to put the meat on the bones of what we think that is and how we would go about bringing forth the pillars, the key aspects of what we think the AT&T brand should stand for. And how do we back that up with tangible examples and evidence that people would look at and say, I believe what you're saying. You can support that with the way you behave and what you do. And to be the best, you've got to make sure that you have that foundation laid, and then you have to go and articulate it and put money behind it and make sure that everybody looks at it and says, yeah, I can buy that. And it takes some time and work. I think you're going to start to see that come forward next year as we move into the early part of the year. But I don't want anybody to say, well, this is just an advertising campaign. It's not. It's about operating the business differently. It's about changing the way the products are represented in the market where you can actually support those points of view. And this will be iterative over a couple of years to get to that point where we can all say, wow, we've really arrived where we are the best. And the customers agree with us and they perceive that to be the case. But all that work is underway. All those frameworks are being thoughtfully developed right now. There's a lot of research going on behind it. We're spending a lot of time listening to customers. We're talking with employees internally to find out what employees believe, how leaders think we should move down this path, and we will do it the right way. And it will be far more than just a slogan or an advertising campaign. It will be the framework under which we operate this business. But I believe the foundation is we got to have really good infrastructure underneath that to have the right foundation to move forward. So it's a good question.
So earlier you said where you want to see us in 3 years, and you also talked about wanting AT&T to be that company that is the holistic provider of robust, safe connections. So I just want to bring this back to, or those two concepts back to our competitors. I think there's three, right? T-Mobile, Verizon, and the cable world, if you will. So Verizon acquired double the C-band spectrum than we did, on average. And they announced that they, by 2024, are planning on offering fixed wireless through the C-band, as well as millimeter, et cetera, to 50 million households. So question is, how does that, our fiber initiative that we're keen on, how is it going to pan out in 3 years if Verizon delivers, which of course we don't know. And looking at the other side, T-Mobile and cable. So is that something we need to think through as we're thinking where to invest and how to invest?
So they're all good questions, and I think the first thing I would say is we're not done with spectrum. In fact, we're in the
Hope
middle.
not.
We're in the middle of an auction right now.
Yes, sir.
And while I can't talk about it in any level of detail, I don't believe anybody wants to walk into a future disadvantaged with that right-of-way dynamic that I talked about earlier. And if I step back and think about why we made some of the hard decisions we made in structuring the business differently, and that why we're in the middle of that was in fact to free up the balance sheet to be able to go do those things that were necessary to move the business forward. And so I don't think one should conclude that we'll be in a situation as you described it at the front end of a spectrum deficiency circumstance to Verizon or anybody else as we move forward. I think it's our job to make sure everybody has the right tools available to be effective. And it's my job to ensure we put the business in that position. Now, how do I think about the competitive landscape? I would tell you, you should play to your strengths. You should play to the capabilities that you have. And I just start this discussion to say, what could be better than owning more fiber than anybody else and having a scaled, owned and operated wireless network? And you just went through what I'll call the list of more traditional competitors. Mm-hmm. There are also the non-traditional that we didn't even raise, the Amazons of the world, the Apples of the world, et cetera. But for the point of your discussion or what you outlined, I would say T-Mo doesn't start with the kind of fiber infrastructure that we have. Verizon doesn't have the kind of fixed line fiber infrastructure that we have. Cable owns no wireless. I think we start from a unique position of strength across the board that none of those companies can walk in and say, I've got all those things. And so if we play to our strengths and we do all the things that were just talked about at this table, if we engineer in a way that we aggregate across all those segments more effectively than anybody else, I think we're in a great place.
Have you given much thought to acquisitions of fiber? There's a lot of fiber assets out there. And if the infrastructure dollars go to good, are put to use to build more broadband, there will be much more. So is that a path for growth of our fiber acquisitions?
I think what I would say right now, what this business and our company needs to do is take the substantial amount of assets that we have and the substantial capability we have to organically build network and do that really well and prove to the investment community that in fact we can make those things happen that I have been out there talking about, that we can in fact be the most scaled infrastructure provider, that we can go out and prove to states that we're worthy of the competitive subsidy that they're looking at bringing out because we're the best partner to work with, to penetrate the existing infrastructure that we've already put in place to continue to gain share in home connections, business connections, and wireless connections. When we do those things and we do them consistently, you then have the credibility to do a lot of other things, such as maybe consider inorganic moves.
One thing I really like about the vision you paint, particularly that scenario you paint where you get out there with the wireless infrastructure, you aggregate enough, then when you find the right tipping point, you go in with fiber. One of the things I kind of think about is this belovedness. You need to be beloved across any access technology you have. And right now it feels like there's times, there are definitely some products we need to decommission because the belovedness is not there and you get this negative halo effect. And as you raise
They were
that,
beloved in a time gone by.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, a couple of decades ago. But you bring that level up, and then all of a sudden you get that halo effect across all products. And that's one of the things I really like about the vision that we're painting, is trying to be that quality across any access technology. Then the other thing you said is maybe where we don't have it, we go partner in the right way to bring that forward. I think that's a really interesting concept to fill in the portfolio.
Glenn, I think we all just think about driving around your neighborhood, right? Think about the places you go and see, between going to visit your doctor and what occurs when you go into the medical building versus when you go to pick up some carryout at the strip mall down the street from you. Very different environments, right? Mm-hmm. You go into that medical facility and you can bet everybody in the offices up and down that hall are probably shipping x-rays back and forth, and MRI images and huge files of your history and all this kind of stuff, right? Wow, that's scaled environment. You probably better have fiber into that building and you better be able to service them in that way. Now you go to the strip mall down the street to pick up your Tex-Mex takeout. And what's next to the Tex-Mex restaurant? The dry cleaner. What's next to the dry cleaner? The nail salon. What's next to the nail salon? The beauty parlor. What's next to the beauty parlor? The shoe repair place. I didn't really hit one that's kind of moving MRIs around or x-rays, right? They got a point of sale transaction when you come pick up your laundry. They need a phone to be able to answer an inbound call from a customer. So to your point, if you have the right access technologies and the right product, boy, you can walk in and you may not need to have fiber initially to start penetrating that strip mall or building some traffic, but once you get everything in the strip mall, maybe it makes sense to drop in something that's more permanent and fixed. And so we need to think about it in that regard, and then we think about the partners that have to solve that problem for us. When you go into the doctor's office, what is the doctor's office thinking about? Do you think they say, well, gosh, I'm going to call AT&T to run my office? No, they say, who's my software provider that's going to provide me all my software that's necessary to do my patient administration, bill the insurance companies, move files around, do this and do that. And oh, then, by the way, I need some bandwidth to do that. But that's the second thought, right? And I think it's almost the same when you go into some of those strip malls. If you go into the restaurant that's in the strip mall and they say, I got to open up and run my business, they probably don't say, gosh, I need to talk to AT&T first. They probably go and they get some equipment in their kitchen, and then they think about what their point of sale transaction, how are they going to get the orders into the kitchen and render a receipt to the customer. And then they go, oh, I need some bandwidth to make that work. So our partners sometimes now need to be the person that the customer thinks of first. 60% of small businesses start by running on the infrastructure they already have at home. They then move out and make decisions as they scale. Most small to mid-sized businesses call somebody like Microsoft before they call us. But we really haven't built the right infrastructure in terms of our channel partners to do that as aggressively as we should. We're getting better at it. We're starting to do it. But we need to kind of be underneath that where they're dragging us with them. And that's where your question earlier about what do we do to make our product work better with them? If we can work better in the Microsoft cloud, where you can simply go on and not only take your cloud services down to run your business with your email and your team's capabilities, et cetera, but also click on, I need bandwidth in, and here's the day it's going to show up. That's how you become a preferred network, right?
I just want to take us back. So we talked about it earlier, but I think I'd love to hear from folks at the table as well as you, John. I've only been at the company less than 3 years, so I'm basically an AT&T baby. But even in the past year, I've seen such a huge transition and such a huge transformation in how people work together and sort of the breaking down of silos. And it makes me really excited. But there's obviously still work to be done. And so I'm not sure if folks have other places where they think we still really need to sort of knock down those walls or make sure we're all talking to each other across the business.
I want to add to her question. So we have the consumer, the business mobility services, right? What are your thoughts of aligning the strategy back to the silos? So we're not talking about we're T-Mobile or Comcast. We're AT&T, we're experts in connectivity. And how do we deliver that as a business?
I suspect most of you around the table would say we're probably not quite optimized in terms of our collaboration and breaking down some of the structures that we have around an organization. I would also say, after having worked for too many years in my life, there is no such thing as a perfect organization. And there is no such thing as a perfect organization chart. They all have their pros and cons. And if your first answer is to do better, let's reorganize, I caution somebody to say that's not always the right answer. Now, if you reorganize to get the right incentives in place, the right collaboration and structure, that can oftentimes be productive. And I know that there's some work going on right now, as we just talked about, channel partners, and is working at the small end of business and the mid-sized business, where our goal is to do owned and operated infrastructure as opposed to buying access through third parties. Should we be configured a little bit differently to do those kinds of things? The answer is probably yes, and I know that there's some planning underway to respond to that. So where, as I just said, if 60% of small businesses start out on your home infrastructure, why should there be a forced transition for customers in that? And I think the very smart people that we have working in those channels are looking at that and saying, maybe we need to rethink how we're organized around that, make sure that we're being responsive to a customer. So I think there's going to be some changes that you're going to see flow from that. Now, having said that, please don't leave here thinking that redrawing boxes on the org chart is going to make us work better together. In fact, I would say the hardest thing for us to probably collectively do is rethink how we exist within a company that collaborates and works together.
Yeah, John, I think another thing that leadership has done a really good job. I'm not an AT&T baby. I'd call myself like a preteen. And I've seen
What does that make me, a senior citizen?
age is but a number. I think what I've seen a really, really solid push from leadership on is a consistent set of priorities. Do we have room and opportunity? Sure. But I think when you think across consumer and business, and even within consumer, the alignment we have around what the mission is, I don't believe has ever been clearer. And I think that has helped us break down the silos and just say, okay, there's a bucket of money sitting over there. We'll talk about how we're going to go attack that bucket of money, but it'll be in partnership. And I really do believe that comes from having a clear set of priorities.
Just to add on to that too, I think the 4 pillars that we got to act boldly and move faster. And I actually think the fiber penetration, the fiber build, all the stuff we're doing, it doesn't matter if you're consumer, business, or in between. That has been a great example and use case for, we don't care what group you're in, we're all working towards the same goal. And I know the guys that are sitting right around me are all examples
As
of
I said earlier, I gave you the goal, right? How much traffic per foot?
go.
Everybody, just get more traffic per foot of fiber you put in, and we'll all be in really good straits.
Yep.
Okay, I appreciate all of you spending the time with me today. I hope, I can tell from your questions and level of engagement that you're as excited and as engaged on this topic as I am. And we just, in the course of our dialogue here, think of how many things we just outlined that we still have to be better at, that we need to go get done, the product evolution work that needs to be done, what we can do around repositioning the brand proposition. How do we think about making what we do in our infrastructure and our products more relevant to the customer? The wonderful freedom that will come from getting the network optimized and consolidated and down onto a base set of infrastructure where we're focused on what truly moves us forward, not necessarily something that worked really well for us 40 years ago. I think this is an incredibly powerful set of opportunities and frankly business problems to solve. I appreciate your energy around doing that. I hope this gives you some insights as to where I think we need to be over the next couple of years, and I look forward to celebrating that success when we get there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.